Hi, happy Tuesday. This is
Yeah.
Barb Wallace. I am here with my partner in crime, Renee Ryan, yet again. Donna is still grandbabying, as it were. That's what is it, grandparent leave or something like that?
Yeah, they should. They should pay for that, I think. I think it would be fair. Yeah.
Although getting her text, I think she would pay for this because it's just cuddling with a grandbaby. So, but she will be back. But we have Renee. What's new?
Oh, just writing. Very well, actually, I'm not writing, I'm researching. And then I'm working the day job. I'm not on contract right now, and I'm having a lot of fun researching and digging deep, deep, deep. And for me, writing historical fiction has always come from the research. So I have a real itty bitty germ of an idea that as I start digging deep into the research, the story will come to me. So I love this part. It's that discovery. I just wish I had more time.
I could spend forever doing that.
Same. Oh my God.
I will say though, you do have a book coming out, and we're going to preview the cover.
Yes, we just did the cover reveal. Look at that. Yeah. Look at you. The last fashion house in Paris. And I feel like this is a really good World War II full circle for me, because one of the characters in my first World War II historical fiction, The Widows of Champagne, this is her story. And it's I feel like we're kind of closing we're tying all the threads up, closing the door on World War II for now. And it's set, obviously, guess where? In a fashion house in Paris. I think the Spitfires in the back tell you that it's during World War II. So yeah, it was.
I love the colors.
Oh, they pop so well. I think they did a great job. I think this is probably my best cover yet.
I don't know. The last one was good too, but this one, this is a beautiful.
Yeah, they did nice. And I love that it's a big title, The Last Fashion House in Paris. So I think, they just went ahead and went for it and put it right there, slapped it right there.
I like it. And your name's nice and big.
Yeah, it keeps getting bigger. Every book, it gets a little bit bigger.
I didn't know that. Actually, I'll go back and look. I have all your others to look. Yeah. So, okay. Well, now that we've talked about Renee's, we will move on, because Renee picked this month's book of the month. And it was The Trouble with You by Ellen Feldman, which is the story. It's set in post-World War II. And it is the story of a wife and mother, who's with a husband that she married during World War II, whose life is completely turned upside down by, in a split second, in a tragedy. And she's forced to go to work to survive. And she takes a job at a radio station and gets involved in the Red Scare of the 1950s. That sound right?
Yep, exactly right. Yep.
And I'm really glad you picked this book, because it was really fun. I mean, fun is not something you would think of saying for the communist scare, but it was a good read. It was not. It was enjoyable. It was a nice, fun read with people you wanted to visit.
Very fast read, easy read, accessible, I think was the word that you used. Yep. And I had never read any of Ellen Feldman. I'm also a big fan of The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, and I felt like this had a feel of the Jewish community in the 1950s in New York City. And I felt like it was a whole different glimpse into that world than the television show. And I also listened to, you know how I am. I also, not only do I read it, I listen to the audiobook. And actually the narrator sounded like Midge. And I was just like, okay. And I was for a long time convinced that they got that actress to narrate it, but she sounded just like her. So it took me a while to sort of separate from that. But I'm so glad I picked it. And honestly, I picked it not knowing it was about the Red Scare. That plays a huge role in this book, but I picked it because it was a new sort of twist of not World War II, but World War II. Does that make sense? It felt like the next step from reading yet another World War II book.
All right, so let's go back to remember the old days when we would do like house selling from the outside in. What do you think of this cover?
I love it. I think you immediately know it's the 1950s.
Yep.
I think you immediately know the trouble. I'm not sure about the title. We'll talk about that in a minute. But it immediately tells me that's, New York Central Park is what it looks like to me. It looks like it's wintertime, which plays a huge role in the changing, how her life is upended and changed. Yep. And I feel like it really captured the heroine and even the red hair, because, she was a redhead.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Forgot about that.
Yeah. So I thought that, yeah, they did what did you think?
I liked it. I don't know if I found as much of a connection with the book as you did looking at it, but I do know that the blues were so pretty that it was just such a pretty cover, and it really reached out. If I saw it on the shelf like that, yeah.
But I think even in real life, I feel like it's even a brighter blue. It's not. I think on the screen, I feel like it looks a little bit more like a wintry blue. But and look, yours is. I guess it depends on what. I feel like it's a much brighter blue than I think it looks when you look at it on in the electronic version.
That's it. And it's so vivid that if I saw this on the table with the other historical titles, I would definitely gravitate towards this.
Absolutely.
It just calls to you. So in that sense, while I didn't attach it to the book, I think that it drew me in anyway. So she definitely got a good cover.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it wasn't, well, it's still a period woman looking away from the camera, but she doesn't have airplanes in the distance.
Well, yeah, like mine. Well, mine are the side, they finally have sort of turned them sideways. But, and I think though, covers are getting darker right now. Have you noticed that in historical fiction, all the covers are starting to have a little bit more of a moody feel. And I feel in that way, this is very moody. It's got a moody feel. And there is sort of a dark premise to this. And so I felt like that part sort of fit the story. I don't get The Trouble with You. The title kind of confused me, but what did you think?
I think I got that because she says it several times, I believe, to Charlie.
Yeah.
The trouble with you. And he's always saying, the trouble with you.
Yeah. And that's, that's true.
I think it was something that was always, people kept saying, the trouble with you, Fanny, the trouble with you, Charlie.
Yeah. So and it does feel very 50s because the one thing I loved about the book itself was and I think it's because Charlie was a radio script writer for, they never called him soaps for the daytime dramas.
Yeah.
And he spoke very, it was very 1950s with all his slang, and The Trouble with You did fit that. So I do get that now that you said that. The trouble with you, Fanny, and that feels very the slang of the 1950s.
Yeah, but it was not. She didn't hit you over the head. Her dialogue was actually really kind of snappy. I thought really, really good dialogue.
And when she really dug in, and a lot of it was when the heroine was having the conversation with Charlie more than anybody, even more than Rose. I feel like with her. I don't know. I felt like that dialogue was so stinking snappy, and she was really smart. Sometimes the heroine would have just this amazing snappy one-liner. There were some amazing one-liners, and that felt very Midge from, the Mrs. Maisel, and it felt very 50s radio drama, 50 television show. So it was sort of the dawn of so much sort of vernacular of that time period.
And I think that's why, we were saying it's kind of a fast read. I think because so many historical fictions are very dense with the research and a lot of inner thoughts and a lot of introspection and description. This was dialogue heavy.
Fanny was, yes, it was at least in the middle. Once she got her job at the radio station, it became very dialogue heavy. And you've never read Civil Disobedience, have you? The one that by Omar or whatever?
No, it's on my list.
And if you like that sort of real snappy dialogue, the feel of, he does that in the 1920s. And that is probably why I loved that book. It was fast. It was snappy dialogue. And I feel like, yes, that definitely was the reason to take, and even more so than any other book I've read during this time period. You could tell I'm assuming the author's from New York. Did we get that?
She wasn't. She spent time there, that's for sure.
Okay, for sure. Because it felt very authentic.
Yeah. So now if you were going to pick one theme, or one word or one or two words for the theme of the book, what would you pick?
It's definitely I would say transformation. Her transformation, because she literally becomes a brand new, different person. And Fanny wars with two sides of her personality throughout the entire book.
Yep.
And she's transformed finally at the very end when she lets go of society norms, when she lets go of even what Rose is telling her versus Mimi, what Mimi's telling her. And you've got Rose, who's like your left of liberal, done everything on the left side. And then you have Mimi, who's right of conservative. And you've got both of them playing at those two sides of her. And I felt like that it is transformation would be for me, is watching that female transformation in a society that wants to pigeonhole women.
That's a good word for it. I was going to go with taking risks, because there was so much about playing it safe versus stepping outside your comfort zone and trying new things. And I think the reason it hit me like that was because I was raised by a mother who was that same generation. She was a 1950s woman. She was married to a World War II vet, and they were very traditional. And it was very much a marry well, have kids, stay home. When I went to school, she's like, well, major in some things that you can use if you have to go to work. And it was one of those things. And she was very much like Mimi, although she would have said she wanted to marry better than Mimi, but or marry well like Mimi. But she was very much like that, and she was very afraid to take risks. And I think that she reminded me very much like Mimi and some of the other women who would have done more, but they were told they shouldn't.
Yeah.
And I think it really hit home to me that I was raised by a mother like that, and really had to kind of push it back against it, because she didn't understand the idea of women being independent.
I mean, I grew up in the South, and I grew up with my parents. My daddy was a World War II vet. So they were, it felt very Mad Men, but earlier, very much this time period, lots of the cocktail. The thing that really felt super authentic was the smoking and the cocktails that they had every night, that they were, let me fix you a drink into the ice bucket, and all of, like that part of this felt so authentic, because that's what I remember of my parents, and especially my mother. And I was talking to my sister this morning on my way to work, and I remembered my mother had this after my mother got divorced. So it was not the same as what happened to Fanny, but my mother got divorced when we were very young, and my father was this doctor, and her whole life imploded. And she really warred with, is she going to just be that tennis playing bridge woman that's going to live off alimony, or is she going to go back to work? And ultimately the decision was taken out of her hands, much like Fanny. She didn't have a choice. My mother had to go back to work. But in that time, she had a friend who, this is the other thing, one of the threads is that Chloe never really realizes the friendship between Charlie and her mother. And I'm like, oh, are you kidding me? I knew exactly what was happening with my mother and her friend. And they were friends for over probably 12 years and 2 decades, certainly within, scoped over 2 different decades. And I'm at that part, I was like, well, clearly she, I was like, no, Chloe was way smarter than that. She would have known. But yeah, I mean, my daddy used to always say that a Southern woman hasn't made it until she's perfectly useless, meaning other people can do everything for her, so that all she has to do is pick up the children and play bridge and make sure dinner's on the table, whether she cooks it or someone else, always makeup, you got to look your best in the morning. Got to look your best when he comes home. Very much. That was, my mother used to always, yes, very much. That was.
Yeah. I mean, we weren't that well off. We were more working class, but my mother, when my father died, she didn't know how to do anything, because it had been 50 years of the man making the decisions, 50, financial, all of that.
Yeah.
So one of the things that is in this, which I found interesting, is there was a lot of rules that women had to obey. And I didn't know a lot of them. I mean, I remember some of them from the 80s because they stuck around, but like that they couldn't go to bars alone.
Right.
Which is funny, because in the 20s they did. So
totally different world, totally different. It was very much backsliding for a while. It was after the war. It was almost like, it was the Leave It to Beaver. It was everybody has to have that perfect family, and it was the baby boom, and it was traditional marriages and the traditional home, and it was mom and dad, and which is interesting because so many war widows, and it was like there was that pressure to get remarried, and it was just a really interesting time. And again, in the South, those rules lasted way into the 80s, so I was very aware of all the rules for sure.
Well, I'd read somewhere once that the whole Eisenhower pressure to be perfect, up 2.3 kids and all that, was they felt it was their patriotic duty to prove to the communists what true blue values were, or whatever.
Right. And this is what a healthy nation looks like, is when you've got all the couples basically having their kids and living well, and the 2.5 kids and the washing machine and the dryer and the television and the home. Yep.
Right. And Fanny, she does represent the people who went back to work, because you did have people who had gone to work during the war and didn't want to go back home. But at the beginning, she is living that traditional 2.3 kids, suburbs, married to a wonderful man, and she's happy. So it makes you wonder, like, what do you think she would be like if Mitch hadn't died? Sorry, spoiler, but he dies like in 4 pages.
Well, yeah, he dies very quickly. That's interesting because Rose had been in her ear a lot after he died. And I don't know how much Rose would have been in her ear. It was very clear that Rose, her aunt, favored her over Mimi. And I mean, it wasn't Rose the one that paid to get her through college, right? Didn't she? Or no, she insisted that her father put her through college.
Right, that was that.
Right, to one of the 7 sisters. And it would all have depended on how much Rose played in her life, because Rose was the one that got her the job with Alice. And so I don't know, I think she would have been like a lot of women, like I think even Ellen Feldman's mother, she would have lived that safe life and told herself she was happy, but would have been always a hole in her life, and she wouldn't have known why.
That's a good way to put it, because she did love Mitch. She loved her husband, and he made
it
clear he was the love of her life.
Love of her life, but he was also taken from her before any sort of hardship sort of hit their world. And I feel like that was also part of it, where they didn't have a lot of struggles yet in terms of
the war.
Well, but I'm talking about after he came home.
Oh, okay.
And remember, there was a part where she had the memory of their one big fight, and it was over him dismissing her. Remember, she knew more about foreign policy than his medical friend,
right?
And he didn't stand up for her, and he's like, why would I stand up for you? You could do it yourself. And then her like having that weird sort of, I thought that was a great what James Scott Bell calls a mirror moment, where you look back, the main character, and I think it was right around halfway point, takes a look at themselves and realizes they have a point where they're going to have to go one way or another in order to get to their ending, so to speak, in the book. And I feel like she had that moment of understanding that her husband was Ezra, and he was very much of Ezra, and she was going to have to, and when she had that moment of, wow, I am smart, I can do things. And I feel like he really, really would not have liked that of her. He wanted her to be a home.
Oh, because that's funny, because I saw that totally different.
Did you?
Yeah, I saw it, and she remembered that. And Rose makes the comment, "You're the only person I know who's complains because your husband thought you could handle yourself."
Right. And then she realized she wanted both. She wanted it both ways.
And I think she was trying to recreate Mitch is it Mitch or Max?
Max.
In
Ezra.
Trying to recreate Max in Ezra.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that actually Max was a little bit more. His mother worked. It
was shame to his family. His father considered his mother, Ezra. His father considered the woman in his home working as shameful.
Yeah.
And Max's father and mother considered the mother going to work as very respected. So who knows? Maybe she would have ended up where she did, but then you wonder Charlie would have never sort of entered her life, because he immediately stepped back when he saw the ring.
She might have worked at something else, or like part-time or something like that. I agree with you there. I do think that Max was less like Ezra in that he did respect her intelligence.
Yes.
Ezra was like don't don't trouble yourself. Just learn enough so you can sparkle at dinner parties, and then
And make a souffle.
right. That is exactly what he wanted.
Yeah,
So,
he wanted her to make a souffle. Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
So now we keep talking. We've talked a little bit about the love triangle, but we keep talking about Charlie. And Charlie, the big plot around Charlie is that it's the Red Scare.
Yes.
And there's a couple characters that get blacklisted.
Yes.
And I was curious what you thought of that, because did you think that they kind of delved deep enough?
No, I don't think so. I think,
Yeah.
well, and this is probably the trouble with you, the trouble for me, in general, and I absolutely adored this book, and I will say highly recommend, because I do think that it is a great read.
Well,
But
I
I
don't
would
think
say,
I think that we would have gone a different way. It would have been a heavier book. But
yes, and I would say that I feel like there were so many things that we get a glimpse of and she touches on, but at the end of the day, this was Fanny's story, and it was Fanny's journey, and it was very much women's fiction. It was not historical fiction. It was women's fiction set in a historical time period.
That's definitely a good way to put that. Yeah.
Yes. And I think that the historical fiction reader in me was, and I was too young. I don't remember the McCarthy era. I don't remember, I don't even know if I was alive, because I wasn't born until the 60s. So
yeah, I'm sure my brother was just born when it was happening. So yeah.
Right. And it didn't really touch our lives because we weren't entertainment. My father was a doctor, my mother was a stay-at-home mom. So it didn't touch our lives and didn't touch us in the South. So I feel like that part of it, I wanted to know so much more about it. But at the same time, now that I'm talking about it, knowing it was Fanny's story, it was just enough to, and as you said, taking chances. And as I said, transformation. It's why she became who she did, because people she knew personally and liked, adored, and considered close to her were blacklisted. And that when it's personal, changes everything.
That's right. I would love, there's a character, Ava, and I would love if she had a story.
I would read her book.
Because I want to know what happened to her. She was blacklisted, and she
disappeared.
Of all of them, she was pushed closest to the bottom.
Yes. And hit rock bottom, and then ended up, I think the last we saw of her was that she was modeling dresses at Bergdorf Goodman.
No, she went to London.
Oh, that's right. She got the play. That's right. I would love to. I hope. Let's send vibes to Ellen. Write Ava's book. Write Ava's book.
Yeah. So, asking all that, what did you think of? Okay, so I go back to, what did you think of Charlie as a character and Fanny as a character?
I felt like Charlie, and this is where the choices that Ellen made was that Charlie, I knew immediately, was going to be the guy that everybody's going to love, because he was so layered. He was like this onion. She kept peeling back these layers of this guy, and he was so layered, and he was so
freaking adorable.
He was adorable. His dialogue and his, even the soft shoe out of the room all the time, and just the way that he spoke, and the way he spoke to her, and the way that he called her on things. And he was so layered. And even when he got blacklisted, which it's not a big plot surprise, because people get blacklisted in this book.
You kind of knew, you're like, ooh, he was pushing.
You knew immediately, because there's all of his conflict with Alice was because he kept trying to push things in. And even the story about the bear, remember the bear?
Yeah.
Love that. But I feel like with Charlie, we had to like him. I feel like Ezra was not as layered. So it was hard to root for Ezra, because we didn't know anything about him. And Charlie's grace when he was blacklisted, and his grace under pressure, and his sadness when people killed themselves during the blacklist, his sadness over losing people like that. And then his help with Ava. Wasn't he the one behind getting Ava the job?
Yeah, he called some people in.
Yes.
Yep. It helped
How
her.
did you not love him? How did you not love him?
You had to like him, because he does draw Fanny into kind of a questionable arrangement.
But I liked Fanny better when she was with him.
Yes.
Didn't like her so much when she was with Ezra. And I think that was brilliant on Ellen Feldman's part, that even when she was with Ezra, I didn't like Fanny so much.
Well, she was bland.
Very bland. And Ezra was very bland.
Right. And she didn't talk about anything. She didn't express too many opinions. It was all very, don't rock the boat. Let's go have dinner and cocktails.
Right. And even like from the writerly standpoint, even the scenes when they ended and they began bland, they ended bland. With Charlie, they always started with a pop, ended with a pop. So even that narrative structure made Charlie more likable and Fanny more likable when she was with him. And when he was with Chloe, the way he treated Chloe. Ezra was more parental with her. Charlie was more really, and I hate to use the word uncle because that makes it no, but he treated her like she was smarter than she was smart. She was intelligent. He didn't treat her like a baby. He treated her like she deserved to be talked to like an adult, and I don't mean he adultified her. He just treated her like she was smart.
And he encouraged her.
Yes.
Like,
and he was likable with her and she liked him. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So we've been chatting for a while. We'll wrap it up because you were talking about this last night. And so you said you wanted to talk about her narrative choices.
Yes.
That there was 2 different styles.
Yes, very much so. The one thing that I noticed when I first started the book, the beginning it was a little hard for me to get into because I felt like we were in Fanny's head for way too much, which is the narrative style is basically a lot of telling us what was going on. Even Max's death, we didn't experience it. She told us about it and we experienced it through her telling us about it. And then once she gets the job, it gets very active. And we get the dialogue and all the scenes are much more active and there's interaction and there's people going on. Then we get to the end and she ends with a lot of telling. It's like she's wrapping everything up. And so I felt like it bookended the story. The real story was in between the telling, the beginning and the end. And that made it a little bit more difficult. So anyone that starts this book and they're like, it's a little slow, or I find it a little, I'm not quite getting engaged, I would recommend get through that part, because once she starts interacting with Rose and gets that job with Alice and, as a secretary, it just soars. The story soars. And I'm wondering why she chose that narrative style, because that's not the way I would have done it.
I don't know. I'm thinking though, those portions were very melancholy. Mm-hmm. And, she's thinking she'll think when she remembered those days, the 2 things she would remember would be, and everything was painted as just kind of
gray
in a distance too.
Yes. At a distance. Yes.
And I think
it was like a reporter telling the story as opposed to it was getting reported to the reader.
But I think that was because she was muted in it. I think she was supposed to be.
That's my point.
And her emotions were she was also dead inside after he died.
Yeah.
For a long time.
Yep.
And
so even the beginning, like when we're leading up to it, it was still very much almost all narrative, hardly any dialogue. And same at the end. It's kind of like once she breaks up with, then as it ends, I don't want to give it away. I felt like a lot of the things that were really huge parts of the plot sort of got, again, back to the telling. And maybe it was like we were disconnected again because she sort of hit that transformation. This is who she is. I love the transformation of Chloe. I thought that was amazing. Yeah. And how she ended, how the writer ended that character. So, maybe that was the idea behind it.
Well, what's interesting is we are actually in Chloe's point of view at the beginning.
Yeah.
And if I were going to nitpick about one thing, because I actually very much enjoyed the book and I would recommend it big time, is that she, every once in a while in the middle of a scene, she'd drop into someone else's point of view and I'd be like, what? And I have to go back. And she didn't do it often, but she did it just enough that it shook me up. Like we'd be going along and suddenly we're in Elder's point of view for 3 paragraphs and then we're back.
And a lot of it was Rose and Chloe. Those were the ones that she would drop in. And
and I thought
that goes back to that telling again. So it was like narrative styles. And you and I, and so I'm telling the listeners, the viewers, that we cut our teeth on narrative style where you don't do that. Everything's active, everything's in real time. you don't ever sort of slow the action. You keep it going. A lot of white space, a lot of dialogue. And that's just sort of the styles that we were taught because, well, let's face it, we wrote romance and romance readers want a fast read. And while this one was a fast read, that beginning was not. So, yeah.
And I thought Chloe was an adorable child.
Yes.
And she did such a good job capturing what it would be like to be 5 or 6 years old and like the things that were important to her.
Yep.
And she did it. And the times that she was in Chloe's point of view, like she would go, she's 6, she's 9, she's a teenager, and you get, she makes so much sense in her head.
Yeah, you could tell if Ellen Feldman doesn't have children, then she's been around children because she really did have those ages nailed down.
Yeah, I mean, the most important things to Chloe are the dresses, and then it was, she wanted a TV set,
right, and it was glued to it. Yes, right. And then her favorite shows, which because when Charlie asked her, "What are your favorite shows?" and that again showed that he understood kids too, and Ava teaching her cartwheels and handstands. I mean, that just showed. And that was the other thing too is, and although Ezra was a pediatrician, he didn't have a good rapport with her the way that the others did.
No, he took her to a baseball game and things, and he did try. So I can't.
Well, but but it was more like what you would expect of a dad like that. Like if he was going to be a dad, that would have been the dad he was going to be.
Well, we were talking before the show, and he was saying, you and I were both saying it's a lot like the character in Sweet Home Alabama or in Holiday Affair, where she's torn between two decent people.
Yes.
So, which makes the decision harder.
What did you think of Ezra before we go? Because I know we're at the end.
Part of me liked him for a long time. And then I decided, okay, I don't like you and you're wrong for her. And that was because she made some choices that I didn't think were the best choices, but she eventually kind of owned up to them. She kept some secrets.
And it was a little dangling him.
Yeah.
I felt like, it was like her waffling back and forth wasn't fair to him. I felt like that was a real selfish part of her character, which is probably why I said that I didn't like her when she was with him, because she made some pretty unethical choices a couple of times when it involved him. Yeah. And I felt like that would mean that she was going to not be a good person if she married him.
And she probably would have kept some things from him. That's
a lot of yes.
And I think that some of his assumptions, when you think about it, well, why wouldn't he assume that? Because she didn't tell him anything different. So overall, we both agree. Excellent read. 2 thumbs up.
2 thumbs up.
Really glad you picked it because I probably wouldn't have gotten it. And I'm glad I did because it was a fun read. And I'm glad you were here to talk about it with me.
Thank you. I was just going to say thank you. I love it here. I miss you guys. I miss you and Donna, and I miss the Step in the Story viewers.
Stupid day job. But we will have you. You can come back. We will have you back many times. You're welcome to come back anytime you want. I'm going to be gone for a good chunk of November, so you probably will be co-hosting with Donna, and because I will be in the Caribbean. Sorry.
Oh yeah, just rib it in. Well, then next spring I'll be in Paris, so don't ask me.
Okay. So I will be back next Tuesday with our featured author interview. It's going to be Kimberly Sullivan. She's a multi-published, award-winning indie author. We don't get a lot of indie authors, so it'll be kind of nice change of pace. And she wrote a book called Rome's Last Noble Palace. So we're going to talk about that and a few other things. I know she's active in the women's fiction anthology that she's helping to pull together and a few other things. And then Donna's will be back in June, we hope, unless she decides to become a permanent full-time grandmother. And we're going to talk, our book of the month is going to be Wandering Stars by Tommy Orange.
Oh, yay.
As soon as it came out, I got a text from Donna saying, we're doing this book. So I'm like, oh, okay.
Yes, ma'am.
I'll go out and buy it. No problem. If you like us, please like and subscribe to our channel. We're at YouTube at youtube.com/@Step Into the Story Books, or you can join our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/Step Into the Story. Thanks for watching, and we hope you'll tune in again. Thanks.